listening to the Metal Command Podcast.
Greetings, everybody. Welcome back to the Metal Command Podcast. Tony here with you. And again, extremely excited to be here with everybody. Have a great guest lined up for the show today. And of course, I do thank you for your continued support for the show, not just on YouTube, but on other social media platforms. And again, here on YouTube or any other social media platform, please subscribe or give me a follow if you like what you see and hear. And of course, hit the little bell on YouTube to be notified anytime I do post a video. So today's guest is Fredrik Nordstrom. Many of you may remember the fact that Fredrik Nordstrom is a producer and produced albums by bands such as Opeth, At the Gates, Soilwork, Arch Enemy, HammerFall, and just so many great bands, especially bands coming out of Sweden. And of course, his own band, Dream Evil, which has a brand new album out called Metal Gods. Now, for the 26 years I have done my show, I've interviewed a lot of great people, ranging from bands that are household names to people that you probably had never heard of until they came on the show. And one of the people that I have always wanted on this show was Fredrik Nordstrom. And the reason being is that I have followed this guy for a long time. In my opinion, he is one of the most important people, especially when it came to the resurgence of heavy metal in the late 90s and early 2000s, and continues to just be one of those people that you look at all the past work that he's done, and I just really admire a lot of what he has done as a producer and, of course, as a musician with his own band Dream Evil, which I think is absolutely positively one of my favorite power metal bands that has ever come out of Europe. They have a new album, of course, called Metal Gods. I will be reviewing that shortly. However, I did bring Fredrik on the show. We do talk a lot about the bands that he produced, as well as the Dream Evil album, and of course the metal scene throughout the 90s and early 2000s. So with that said, thanks for watching. Here is the interview with myself and Fredrik Nordstrom from Dream Evil. Welcome to the Metal Command Show. I have a really awesome guest with me today. It's Fredrik Nordstrom from Dream Evil, and of course, somebody who has produced and mixed quite a few great records over the years. I've followed you since the beginning of this show 26 years ago. So ironically, what's funny is that anytime I've ever had a chance to interview you, some kind of conflict would come up, usually on my end, and I was never able to do it. So now I'm really excited to have you on my show finally after all this time.
Thank you. Yes, probably this is going to be a lot of fun. So
it is, absolutely. It's funny because I remember Dream Evil when the first album came out. I remember getting the first record, the CD sent to the radio station way back in the day, and I've pretty much followed what you've done with this band since then. This new album, I think, is fantastic, and let's talk about that, because I would probably consider this one probably easily one of the better albums, maybe the top 2 or 3 that you've ever done with this band. And talk about the new album you have that has come out.
Yeah, actually, to be honest, we did the album 6, and the band felt like, we can do better than this. This is not a good album. So, then we get a new drummer in the band, and we also felt like, we want to have him in the band on an album that we doing good together. So we actually spent several years writing music for this album. So this was not a fast one.
No.
And we also decided to go back to my studio and record it instead of, like we did on the 2 previous albums. Everybody did like home recording, and I reamped guitars in the studio. So we went back and did it like the old-fashioned way.
Yeah. Yeah, I would, it's interesting because I remember when the debut came out, and I remember the early days of the band, because you had Gus G in the band, Snowy Shaw was in the band. You had practically like this all-star lineup, as far as musicians go. And I really, the one thing about this record that really resonated a lot with me is when I remember hearing the promo probably maybe a month ago, and I thought the production and the sound of the album is probably, in my opinion, it could be the best sounding album you've ever produced for this band. And did going back in the studio have a big effect on that, instead of everybody doing their own like kind of individual thing, and then maybe you mix it and go from there?
Yes. Yeah. Also, like our singer, he was always complaining about, it's so hard to stand in my basement recording vocals. I get no feedback. And also it's like with the guitars, it took ages when people are recording. People, I think it's like, you never get satisfied, if you understand what I mean. So you need somebody, come on, let's go. This is good, and move on. And that's my kind of job.
Yeah.
And and we have some fun, me and other guitar player together, also like creative stuff in the studio. And this album recording was an easy going one. We decided 1st of October, start recording, end of October, end of recording.
Yeah.
That's the time frame. And let's do it now.
Yeah. And I think like the quality of the performances and the songwriting and everything. I've always been somebody that's always been an advocate of, you need that other person, that producer, to really kind of push people, push your performance. Usually, in this case, you are a record producer, but you also are in the band as well, and you're able to kind of push these guys. Because I'll be honest with you, I would say the performance on this album, I think everything about it, I think going in and recording it the way that you did, I think the end result is a lot better because of that. And I think sometimes bands, I could tell you that doing this show, I get a lot of bands that have been around a while that you'll get a record by, and they don't really have a producer to kind of do it themselves. And I think they lose a little something because of that.
Yeah, but it's just that thing. It's like, if you like, that's took me many years to learn. It's just like, drop it. It's good. It's fine. That's awesome. If there is something in after a while that you feel like, okay, let's do it again then. And it's I've been there so many times. It's like musicians are like, I don't really like this, I want to do it again. And then you spend like 2-3 hours of recording a fucking small little riff, and it's just worse and worse and worse. So I think it's important that you drop stuff and go on, because it's good. It's maybe you're not perfectly performed it, but it's good, and it's have energy in there. And if you overdo every stuff and redo and redo and redo, you lose the energy. So I heard like the ABBA producer in an interview, and he said like the best takes is 2, 3, maybe 4. Yeah. So, and that's kind of my job. If you're a musician, you can sit there for ages and it never ends.
No, I gotcha. So let's talk about this band in general. I've always felt Dream Evil in what you've done with this band has never, I always thought that this band deserves more recognition than what they seem to get. And I remember hearing of you way back in the day, with, you were producing, In Flames and HammerFall and a lot of these awesome bands that I was really getting into back in the day. And what sort of inspired you to form this band, kind of go back into history a little bit and talk about the first album and getting this band together. I think it's fascinating with some of the musicians that you had when you started out, with this group, and with the first album and, first couple records, first 3 albums you put out. And, what inspired you to form this band and find these guys initially that you formed the band with?
Actually, I built my studio to record my own music from the beginning.
Okay.
So, and then I shared a rehearsal room with Oscar Droniak from HammerFall, Jesper Stolberg from In Flames, but they had another band called Ceremonial Oath, and so I get them to record in my studio, and then suddenly I was into recording death metal for 10 years, and I was like, fuck, I started this studio. I built this massive studio of 330 square meters. Yeah, I'm gonna fucking... built a studio to record my own music, and I have done nothing. And then I went to Thessaloniki in Greece to do pre-production with a band called Extremation. And the guitar player Marius, he now have this band called Outrage. And his best friend was Gus. And he was like, Gus is a really good guitar player. And when we recorded the album, Gus came to with Marius to my studio.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried to find him a band he was only 18 years old. He was a newbie, so to speak. And, but I couldn't find him any band that was interested. And we tried to get him people give it so he could give it guitar lessons, but nobody was interested in that either. So I was like, hey, you know what? I have a couple of songs here that I wrote back in the days for my old band. Maybe we should take it up and form a band. So that's actually how it started. Me and Gus were starting writing songs. We made a demo of 5 songs. We need somebody to sing. I remember I had like a guy who did choirs of the first HammerFall album that was really, really good.
Mm-hmm.
I kept his telephone number and I called him up, and he was like, no, yeah, I can do some vocals, but no record contract or no tours. He was like that. Okay, this is just a demo. It's just try to find a singer who will be in the band. And he came down to the studio and he was like, and he was singing for 2 days, and he was like, this is really good stuff. I know a bass player. And he called up Peter, the bass player. And he came down to the studio and he just like fucking nailed everything like in 2 hours. He was one of the best players I ever deal with. And we decided that we four gonna do an album. And for me, it's like the best drummer in the world for that kind of music we're doing. That's Snowy Shaw. So I actually hired him to do the drums. So I paid him money. And then we took him on a couple of shows we did. And he was like, hey guys, you're a fucking normal person. Can I join the band? Yeah, of course. That should be awesome. So he was in the band for 3 albums, and we had a lot of fun together. We're still good friends and hanging out and everything. But, you know, we have in the band, we have a democracy, you know. Yeah. We share all the money equal. Doesn't matter how many songs or whatever you have done, we share everything equal. And also with the work, we try to share everything equal. And that really didn't suit Snowy. He is more like he want to be on his own. So that's why he left the band. It's just like no hard feelings or anything. So, but now we have the second best drummer at least. That's Søren. He's a really, really good drummer.
Yeah.
And he's also very consistent, and he's very serious of what he's doing.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And Nicholas, your singer,
yes.
I've always loved this guy's voice. And how did you meet him? How did you get together with him? And where did you find him at? I mean, because like when it comes to power metal, and when you listen to power metal, in my opinion, as someone that's followed power metal for a long time, he has probably one of the best power metal voices I've ever heard. And maybe talk about how you ended up finding him.
That was actually when we did the first HammerFall, Glory to the Brave. He was in to do choirs for HammerFall. And everybody in HammerFall, HammerFall was a very loose band back then.
Mm-hmm.
They were like, wow, he has a great voice. Maybe we should have him instead, they said. And I was like, no, you cannot do like that. Because, well, somewhere in the back of my head, I had my idea of I'm going to start my band. So
yeah,
that's why I took his telephone number. And I have had him in mind, so to speak.
Yeah. Going back, you talk about the first HammerFall album, for example, or even, some of the In Flames stuff coming out back then. This is, a lot of those albums were coming out at a time when, heavy metal had kind of sort of seen the dark ages. And, then I remember Glory to the Brave coming out. I remember Horacle coming out. I think Soilwork had Steel Bat Suicide, if I recall, coming out. And a lot in Arch Enemy, and you pretty much were producing a lot of these bands who, pretty much all of them have since, done really well for themselves, with their careers. And what was that like, finding these musicians and making these records back then, especially at a time when heavy metal back then, and I remember this very well, was still in its dark ages? What was that like? Did you, when you produced these bands, did you see them really going as far as they have, or maybe talk about meeting them and making some of these records?
Thing was, if you go to the death metal scene, we actually was sitting. I remember me and Jesper Strömblad was sitting and talking about, and that's pretty. When will they play this music on national radio?
Mm-hmm.
And it was maybe never. And I was like, yeah, give it 20 years. Give it 20 years, and it's going to be out there. And with HammerFall, it was just that was kind of a tribute band to German heavy metal and Iron Maiden stuff. That was the original singer in the band was actually Michael Stanne from Dark Tranquility.
Mm-hmm.
And the original drummer was Jesper Strömblad, guitar player in Flames, and so on. And that kind of heavy metal was completely dead back then.
Yeah.
So we recorded Glory to the Brave album on a hilarious small recording budget. Really, of 2 weeks of recording. Yeah. And I just did it because everybody in the band was kind of old clients to me. So I was like, yeah, let's do it, of course. And then Oscar called me up and said, yeah, we have been signed to Nuclear Blast, and they're going to print 30,000 copies. And I was like, fucking great. But in my mind, I was thinking, who's going to buy these albums? Because that kind of music was so dead. So it was just we had Saxon here in Gothenburg playing on a fucking restaurant with 50 people of capacity. That's how small heavy metal was.
Yeah.
In Sweden and the rest of Europe. And suddenly, actually, we give credit to HammerFall that they open up the heavy metal scene again.
Mm-hmm.
They sold 130,000 copies of that album.
Yeah.
There were sold out houses everywhere. It's just in Gothenburg, they played for 600 people. And I saw in the audience just young kids standing there. Yeah. They had Udo Dirksnit there from Accept as a guest vocalist, and they played Balls to the Walls. And everybody in the audience was just standing there watching and wondering, who is that old guy? So it was just a really good, should I call it, revival for heavy metal scene? Yeah. Yeah.
And and then the second album, Legacy of Kings, they were touring here in the States. I remember going to see that show. I actually met those guys back then. They were touring with Death, but they had a really good reception here. I remember Legacy, the second album, when they were touring here. They weren't playing huge arenas or anything, but in a country like this, where I'm at, where this music was probably even more dead than it was in Sweden, they actually really were, making an impact on people, and people were showing up to see these guys. And I remember those first couple records coming out because early on in this show, a lot of power metal was a big thing for me back then, which it wasn't, for a lot of people. Now it's a lot. Obviously, it's got more of an audience, and HammerFall, has an audience here. But back then, they were kind of just getting themselves known with that second album, and they really did make a pretty big impact.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And you also the bands from Sweden that I thought were really, bands that really resonated with me. a lot of the death metal bands, Soilwork and At the Gates and some of these groups. And I always felt that scene, and I don't know what it was like over there, but I know a lot of people here were getting into bands like that, in the late 90s. And that was an interesting scene in group of bands because they were, to me, pretty unique, from the rest of the world. And that was a pretty unique scene coming up. And you had a lot to do with some of those bands as well, and maybe talk a bit about, In Flames and At the Gates and some of these awesome, death metal bands that, I really got into back in 1997, 1998.
Yeah. For me, I'm a guy, actually, I'm from the pop world. So it took me a couple of album recordings to get into that kind of music. It's like my first meeting with death metal was like, as we shared the rehearsal room with this ceremonial oath.
Yeah.
Guys from HammerFall and so on. I came to my rehearsal room early of some reason, and I heard what the fuck is going on in there. So I put in the key and opened the door and looked at what I was like, told my other bandmates, what the fuck's going on in here? It's a new music style, and it's just like, it's called death metal. And I was like, wow. And then I get a record deal, and I kind of get into my small studio I had back then, and we recorded the first album. And on that way, and they came to me like with albums like Death or Napalm Death or stuff like that, and said, that's how we want to sound. And I was like, no, fuck that. I throw the CDs away. Let's do our stuff here. Let's do your stuff. And as I'm from the pop world, it's just like all the melodies and everything that they were doing I like always try to highlight that stuff. Yeah. We went just our way in that stuff and just didn't care about what other people was doing. And my kind of first I did was big production. It was like the Gallery with Tranquility, and then after that, straight off, we did Slaughter of the Soul with At the Gates. Yeah, and suddenly, I don't know what's happened, but the phone was calling from all around the world. People would come to record in my studio. I was like, what the fuck's going on here? So I didn't think about that. And I was also I remember I was in a divorce. So I was totally, I was a maniac in the studio. I was just like, I fled away from family and everything. And we were just in the studio all the time. Right. Yeah. So it was actually a pretty hard time for me in my life during that period.
Did you think a lot of these albums that you were producing would have the impact on people that they have?
No, not at all, to be honest. I remember when we did Slaughter of the Soul, I invited a lot of my friends to the studio to have a private listening to. So I said, like, I think this album is really good, to be honest. And the pop people, and everybody was like, wow, this album is really, really good. And also it's kind of the first album, Slaughter of the Soul, is like where a band have, what should I say, they had a goal. They had a goal of sound like a machine. That's, people are just like, oh, record an album, drinking, like, we have this 3.5 percentage beer in Sweden that is only in Sweden. And they were sitting there with their friends, drinking beer, and finally get drunk. So it was studio was more like a, should I say, a youth center, because everybody was up in the studio, and I had to kick out people from time to time because I tried to mix. You had 20 people in the control room sitting and drinking beer and talking. So it was a kind of childish time.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, I just think of the impact you had with a lot of these bands back then. Now, obviously things are a lot different now. Your brand new album, Metal Gods, maybe talk about the title of that album and any significance that may have. I mean, it is, it's just the power metal that you make with this band, I think is so well done and always has been. And so talk about Metal Gods, talk about this new album and, why the album title, any specific songs of any meaning to you, as far as the lyrics go and maybe talk a bit about that.
We when we talked about we have been talking about recording an album for 7 years or more or less. That's it took some long time, but when we are out playing, there is a lot of fans coming to us and ask us to play like a lot of songs from Dragon Slayer album, and we are like, yeah, then let's do it. So we felt like maybe you should have kind of a vibe in the album that is reflecting to the first album.
Yeah.
And actually my colleague Robert Kukla and his friend Jonathan Torpenberg from The Unguided, they approached us and asked if they can write songs for our band. And I was like, yeah, let's talk with other guys in the band. And they were like, yes, let's them help out. So they have 2 songs on the album that we have co-written, and one of them is Metal Gods. And it was just like Robert, he wake up one morning and he's just like, ding, in his head, Metal Gods. And he came down to the studio and started writing that song together with Jonathan.
Yeah.
And we were like, yeah, that's the title of Judas Priest. But the song was so good, and we came out, start talking about, we really like the song, but we cannot point ourselves out as Metal Gods. So Niklas took the song to his house and he started writing the lyrics. How about he met metal? So everything in the lyrics is actually his way of meeting heavy metal from 82, 83, and so on. Yeah. So it's a tribute to some of the Metal Gods. I was kind of, hey guys, you're missing out one guy here, very important for me, and that's Ronnie James Dio. And then our guitar player say, yeah, but Fredrik, you actually named the band after an album he did, so that's tribute enough. And then also, should we name all Metal Gods? Then the song going to be 40 minutes. So, and also it's like you have some Chosen Force. That's like a quadrology that we did. We did Chosen once on the first album. We did Chosen twice on the third album. And fifth album we did the Unchosen ones. That's actually should be called Chosen Reich, but our German record label said no, it's not going to happen. So we made it as Chosen, the Unchosen ones. So now the Chosen Four, so Chosen Force.
Yeah.
So
my favorite song on the album is Lightning Strikes. I would probably, if I had to pick a song off of this record and say, hey, this is the one I like the most.
Okay.
Lightning Strikes is probably my favorite one.
Okay. Yeah, that's a song made by our bass player, Peter.
Yeah.
He's a good songwriter and lyric writer. A lot of the lyrics in the album is about fighting, We even have a pirate song in there. So
and Night Stalker's the other one. That's the one that really kind of hit me.
Yeah, that's Peter again, actually. You're Peter again. Yeah, but he have a special way of writing. I normally say like he's the only serious musician in the band, and when he says something is cheesy, I know it's good. Night Stalker is about this serial killer that was active in the 90s, I think, in LA. So. Yeah.
So
it's not funny that people. I've talked with a lot of journalists, and people have different favorite songs, which I find very good.
Yeah, it's great. And like I said, I think the album from start to finish is, I would say it's probably one of your top 2 or 3 records you've done with this band. I honestly believe that, because they're, those 2 might be my favorite songs, but overall, the whole entire record, there was just something about it that hit me, maybe a little bit different than the last one. And do you for this kind of music, in a time, because I can tell you as somebody that's followed power metal, a lot of it, I haven't been as big of a fan of a lot of some of the newer stuff. Not all of it. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's great, but it's not, there was like this golden age of like late 90s to like 2003, right? And you guys kind of came at the end of that, and you guys still, it's like you don't put an album out every other year, but every time you do, it's really well done. And I would say this record, probably one of my top 2 or 3 by you guys, easy. I mean, just, and I'm talking mainly songwriting, production, just overall. I think it's an incredible record, and that's kind of where I would rank it, in what you've done. It's kind of hard to pick my favorite one, but I would say this one would definitely be up amongst probably my favorite albums by you.
Thank you.
Do you get a lot of now being a band in Europe? I mean, do you get a lot of people from the US? Do you have a fan base over here? Is there like, because I always feel that your band gets sort of forgotten. People remember HammerFall and some of the other power metal bands, but I always think that this band, as I said before, just doesn't get recognized as much. But do you ever get like a US fan base? Have you ever really wanted to come over here and play shows? Has that ever been a possibility for you?
We're going to do a show in the United States.
Okay.
Prog Power Festival. The thing is, like, we have like 13 kids in the band. It's kind of a hobby project. Because everybody has daily work, and yes, we have the possibility to be a full-time musician, but kind of nobody wants to do that.
Yeah.
So that's why we get forgotten also, because we are not like, it's just like, oh, we have a tour here, and we are like, no, even if you can make money to live on it, but nobody wants to do that. But also the upside of that is like when we meet up, we have so much fun, and we love each other still, and all that stuff. Like we can meet up 4 o'clock in the morning on the airport, and we hug and stuff, and we directly start making jokes and laughing and have super fun together. If we were a full-time musician, that will die. So
yeah, no, I gotcha.
Yeah, so that's why we try to like keep it like, was it low? Is it not low, but keep it not too much. If it gets too much, it's we start fighting and stuff like that, and we don't want to end up in that stuff.
Oh no, I gotcha. I'm sure you've seen some of that happen over the years as well. And not only that, but if sometimes too, when you're not doing something like this full time, you still have like this excitement and this fire to do it. Where I've seen musicians in some bands, it's kind of like they don't want to be there, and they're kind of a little bit miserable. Not everybody, but there are musicians that are like that. And you kind of keep the fire to really make these albums, or keep making these albums really good. Because I'm sure, as when bands are not happy with each other, or there is conflict, making some of these records is not a fun thing to do, and it could affect the output. It affects the outcome.
Absolutely. And it's like playing in a band. Now we're talking about heavy metal, mainly male people playing in heavy metal bands. Mm-hmm. It's like you get a marriage with 4 other guys that you don't have sex with. So, I try to do the same in my personal life. I don't live together with anybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, if you can, have somebody in your life and you meet them up, not every day, but from time to time, everything gets so much easier. That's how it goes for me anyway. So, and I think for the rest of the band also. So you can go home and, do your stuff and whatever.
Record a record, maybe play some festivals, maybe play some shows here and there, but you're not like dealing with the grind of the road. And especially in today's environment, let's be honest, if you're a musician, it's a lot to me, it's a lot more difficult with the economic times that we're facing and the rise of cost of everything now, which was much different, 20 years ago. Right. And
yeah. I think the drummer in Exodus, he explained it really well. I'm not a musician. I'm a traveling salesman in t-shirts.
Yeah. Traveling t-shirt salesman. That's pretty much, yeah, if you think about it.
But it's like fucking rent a tour bus today. It's just like $10,000 for a week.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, you have to pay gas and everything. So, yeah, it's hard to make tours today.
Yeah, definitely. It's not like I remember HammerFall when they came here. They had a bus and a pretty big tour bus, and I'm sure renting that back in 1998, 1999 was probably a lot cheaper. Than it is now. It's relatively to what they probably would get paid. I mean, they were playing small clubs, but they still had a pretty big tour bus, so I'm sure that they were able to get that. I mean, I remember seeing you brought up Saxon. I remember seeing them here. They had a pretty big tour bus, but they probably played a club of like 200 people. This is 1998, 99.
Yeah.
Now
it's changed a lot, actually, to be honest, after the COVID shit.
Yeah.
And also these tour companies, standing there with their expensive buses and everything, and didn't make any money for 2 years. So they kind of had to make up for that, So, yeah, everybody in the music business was suffering so much from the COVID stuff.
Yeah. The last people to go back to work were musicians.
Yes.
That's literally what it felt like.
Yeah, and suddenly everybody wanted to go out and play.
No, absolutely.
Also what's happened was like a lot of the tech people, sound engineer and so on, that they couldn't get any work for 2 years. So they started to be like one of my friends, he went to be a carpenter instead. And, he's like, after he worked as a carpenter for 2 years, and he was like, fuck no, I'm not going to go back there and work every fucking weekend, late night and stuff like that. I make my money here and I go up 7 o'clock in the morning and, home at 4 and I can see my family. So there was a lot of sound engineers and stuff like that was just like left the business totally.
Well, absolutely. I want to bring up Gus Gia for a minute. When you knew he was pretty good when he was younger. Did you expect, because Fire obviously played in Ozzy and Firewind's been doing well for itself. It's amazing how many people that you kind of might have had an impact on in the beginning, and that's one of them. Did you see him becoming, kind of as well known as he is now?
Hard to say. I saw directly that he had like the star quality. Absolutely. And the first tour we did in Japan, I was promoting him a lot for like the magazines and stuff like that. Yeah. Because I wanted him to be a rock star. And when the band decided not to be a full-time band, that's why he left the band, because he wanted to be a full-time musician. So for me, it was just like, yeah, absolutely. He was a good guitar player. We teach him, me and Snow especially, teach him to be even better guitar player. Not by technical stuff, by listening to music, listening to Scorpions, listen to Thin Lizzy, listen to this stuff here.
Yeah.
You don't have to shred all the time. You have to play stuff. I actually throw away all guitar solos on the first album, more or less. And I told him, it's like, if you have nothing to say, shut up. So say something with the guitar solos. And so absolutely, I for me, it's like I saw him. He was a rock star. Yes.
Yeah.
But I didn't know that he's going to end up in Aussie, of course.
No, exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing because I remember like the first Firewind album, right? I remember, Night Rage and some of these other bands that he was playing in, he started off in, and then I don't know what it was. I think it was that album Allegiance. I think it was like the fourth Firewind album. I think that was like the album that they put out that really was like the open the doors for him, I think, because just the songs and everything on that record, I thought was very, very good. And that's kind of where Gus, for me, was like, okay, this guy is the real deal. And I remember when that album came out, and I remember him playing in Dream Evil. I remember him in a lot of these bands early on. So Mystic Prophecy, that was another one. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of crazy when you think about it, because Gus, I think, is a little bit younger than I am, but he definitely he's one of my favorite guitar players. That's why I ask this.
Yeah, but he's a really good guitar player. Actually, I got a new favorite now.
Yeah,
that you do a guest solo on an album. I also co-writing 2 of the songs. That's Jonathan Torpenberg. He has a tremendous voice, and he's a really, really good guitar player.
Yeah,
he's insanely good guitar player, to be honest. He even also managed to play acoustic Spanish guitar really well, which is a very hard instrument to play. But I only play in this band Unguided, so but he's super talented. He is, to be honest.
Yeah, on these albums, you've always had talented musicians. You've always had people that were great players, songwriters. I can't like I can't go back into the Dream Evil discography and think to myself, there's a bad album, because I don't really think there is. And you've always had people that have done really well on these records, either from the songwriting perspective or even, just the playing perspective, when you look at it. And what is it about a lot of the people, like, what do you look for when you find musicians to work with? Like, what are some of the qualities that they have that say, you know what, I want to work with this person?
When it's coming to Dream Evil, it's like we have some lineup changes, but my thing is like we run a democracy here. Everybody share everything equal, which also means songwriting. So if you cannot write songs, you are not welcome in the band. So even our drummer, he's a pretty good guitar player, and so that is important. But the most important is actually how people work as persons. Yeah, because we want to have a good chemistry in the band, and it's not hard to find good musicians in Sweden, to be honest. Everybody, the best one you find in Finland, to be honest. But second place is Sweden, I think. We have a tradition of playing music here, so it's pretty easy to find good people. Singers is always a problem, of course, but yeah. If you need a guitar player, you just pick somebody on the street.
Why is that? Because in Sweden, one of the things it's funny you mentioned that, because I was talking to somebody, a couple days ago, and I'm like, I'm interviewing a lot of people musicians, and a lot of them seem to be from Sweden. and it's always interesting, why is Sweden a country that always has a lot of great musicians coming out of it, more so than a lot of places? I mean, when I look at a lot of bands that, for example, I get albums sent to me, I'm like, this band sounds good. And I look, three of the 4 people or 4 of the 5 people are from Sweden, right? And, what is it about your country that really has a lot of people like this, where music's like such a big thing for so many people there?
My idea is that we have a movement back in the days where the government was actually sponsored a lot of rehearsal rooms, because not everybody want to play football or soccer, as you call it, or do any sports. So they see that, okay, let's bring some rehearsal rooms to. So we had, like, when I was young, we had, like, in my area, we had like 5 or 6 rehearsal room that was owned kind of by the community, and where you can go there and play music. You had it like, you get 2 hours, 2 times a week. You book yourself in. That's one thing. And also it's like, we have 6 months of really cold weather here. And same with Finland. That's why I took up Finland. I think it's like kind of the weather. You don't want to be outside. And then if you're outside, you're skiing or whatever. And if you don't like that, then maybe you should pick up the guitar.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like now these days we have so many rehearsal rooms. Just like where I have my recording studio, we have 3 places, just like in 200 meters, where we have rehearsal rooms, and not one. I'm talking 10 rehearsal rooms, and 10 rehearsal rooms there, and 10 rehearsal rooms there, and you know, everybody carrying a guitar or a bass or drumsticks or whatever where I have my studio, and the whole house where is a lot of studios. So I think there is just this kind of tradition, and for Finland, I think it's the same. I don't know, but there is a lot of good musicians in Finland. I think
agree.
It could be the cold weather that actually makes it. It's easier not to play instrument if you're in Greece, for example, because it's always hot.
Yeah, it's warm and it's nice.
Yes.
Where if you're in Scandinavia, you know, you're really probably playing music, or maybe you're a hockey fan, because most people that I'm friends with from Sweden, we talk about hockey.
Yeah.
That's a big sport for people there. And you know, same thing with Finland. A lot of people from Finland, same thing. I mean, we talk about, you know, if you look at like the NHL, there's a lot of players from Sweden and Finland.
Yes.
In the league, and not just from Canada. And it's kind of like, you know, that's like the sport there, you know?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, you know, that and music. I mean, that's really, like I said, I sit here and I think to myself, man, a lot of the people that I'm interviewing are from Sweden, and you know, and they're from different kinds of metal bands too. It's not just power metal, not just death metal bands. You know, maybe you have some more traditional sounding bands that, you know, more of that classic like Iron Maiden vibe as well.
Yeah.
So you get a lot of different, you know, all these bands that gets where I open up my email box and a record label or a publicist is sending me a new band. I look, they're from like probably over 50% of the time they're from Sweden.
Yeah, back in the days, that was our 3rd biggest export industry in Sweden. We have like Ericsson and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Big industry, Volvo and all the stuff, but 3rd biggest was music. And also I noticed when I was in Australia, I spent 3 months there, and I think like every 3rd, 4th song I heard on the normal radio station, Swedish band, Cardigans, Roxette, ABBA. It's a lot of music from Sweden.
That's cool. Yeah, and the other thing is too, when I listen to bands from where you're from, the way that they speak and you know, a lot of the singers and stuff, they don't sound like they're from Europe, right? They're very like people from Sweden usually are very well spoken, and there are some that probably speak better English than people here. I mean, in all seriousness, and I remember somebody telling me that, I said, why do people from Scandinavia, especially from Sweden, why is their English so good? And a lot of them said that they watch a lot of movies. I don't know how true that is, but they watch a lot of movies in English, and they just get good at speaking the language, you know, more so than people from some other countries in Europe.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons. We don't do like the Germans. Germans dub the movies to German.
Yeah.
So we have subtitles instead, and also I think it's like we're starting in 3rd grade in the elementary school to study English, and that's a problem for actually to be like my colleague Robert Kukla. He's from Canada, and all this young. My English sucks compared to them. To be honest, even my son told me that when I did English.
Yeah.
And he and all his clients, young Swedish guys, sitting there talking English with kind of perfect American accent, and I'm like, guys, stop it! You know, we are in Sweden now. It's talk Swedish. Robert needs to learn Swedish. Otherwise, he's going to be here for 20 years and cannot even understand Swedish. So he's my kind of integration project, and he's really good after 5 years now. He's really good with Swedish. So no, I don't care anymore.
So Do you guys have any shows? I mean, you talked about Prog Power,
Yes.
playing that. Any other shows or anything else that the band has going on? Do you have playing any more festivals? Do you have like any maybe short tours coming up? Maybe talk about what you have currently coming up.
We have a tour, 2-week tour in Australia, which is a pretty different one. And we have a show in Sweden on a small kind of cozy festival, which is going to be hopefully pretty fun. We just did Sweden Rock Festival, which is I think the best festival in Sweden. It's 45,000 people, and everything is about heavy metal. The sun is always there, and it was great. So we're talking about doing some UK shows. I don't know exactly what's going to happen. Everybody here is on vacation right now, so something's going to happen, but I don't know what for the moment.
Awesome, man. So any bands, like, have you been, I know you produced a lot of records back in the day. Are there any bands that you're maybe working with or looking to work with in a recording studio? Just out of curiosity, have you been doing any of that kind of work, lately?
Yes, I have. I'm always in the studio, to be honest. Not now, but because we finally have sunshine here, so I'm gonna go out when we are done with this. But yeah, I worked a lot with this band called Obscura. The tech death, most technical stuff I worked with my whole life.
Yeah.
Yeah. There is some other stuff also, of course, but I always forgot. Let's see what we have done.
Yeah, Obscura, I've definitely heard them.
Yeah, of course. We also, I did a Japanese band. It's a girl band, young girls, super skilled, called Brider.
Mm-hmm.
That you should check out. They're really good. That's also the band we're going to tour with in Australia.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So, and there is this. They have this. We played in Japan for 24 years ago, more or less 22. We was there on 3 tours, and I see it like the Japanese culture it's opening up. They were very strict before. It's just like, this, what you call it, hierarchy thing. And now they are like losing up, but they still have this super kindness. They are like super lovely girls. So that's going to be fun.
Yeah, Japanese, they've always loved their heavy metal bands. That's for sure. It's always been, even when like the music was kind of down everywhere else, they just stuck with it. Throughout the bad times, as you would want to say. But Japan they've always had an appreciation for the music, which is interesting because, when bands couldn't fill like a place that held 50 people, they can go to Japan and play to like, quite a few actually. So I always thought that whole market, especially in the 90s, it was still pretty healthy for a lot of heavy metal bands throughout the dark ages, as we would say.
Yeah. But there are also so many people.
Oh no, I gotcha. No, I get it. So a couple more questions for you before we get done here. You got a tour and everything coming up. For you, with this band, I know you've had this album. I mean, did you have it were a lot of these songs written for a while before you recorded this? Have you maybe started writing for another record? What's the future hold for you, after these shows get played?
We actually did 25 songs for the album. We recorded 14 of them. So we actually have an EP coming out probably end of this year.
Okay.
And there is some stuff in the stuff that we ditched that is really good, but we felt like, we need to work on this stuff. This is a really cool guitar riff, but, it's not enough. and we had a set date and everything. So yes, and we're not going to try to wait another 7 years before we do a new album. We're going to try to do it earlier.
That was going to be my next question. We're going to wait 7 years, but again, I think, like I said, I'll end it off here, and I think the album is very good. I would say that, from the production to the record itself, I mean, it sounds great. I think personally, for me, of any record that you've done, as like a producer, I think it's one of the better sounding albums, one of the best sounding albums you've ever done. And just it's the one thing I like about this is that a lot of these bands will send stuff, and a lot of them will use like the same plugins and all these same templates, and these productions all sound the same, and yours actually has that feel where it doesn't feel like that. I mean, it just feels like, it sounds so much different now, I guess, than what a lot of people send me. And, you actually, as somebody doing what you do, put effort into making the album sound good, as opposed to, I can't even tell you how many times I get a record and I complain about this, because some of these bands that are even on labels will send me stuff that, get it from a publicist, and you're like, man, they use the same drums, the same drum template that somebody else did. So I
think that's the problem. I'm like that. I can be like, we have a Swedish band called Evergrey, which I think is really good, but I'm kind of, when I hear the first snare drum hit, it's like, that snare drum I heard 100 times before, so I just turn off because I cannot listen to it, because the snare drum sounds good, but it's just like, don't use it again and again. I kind of use templates, but my templates are always empty, and I mix around with different kind of plugins and so on, and I always try to build every mix from scratch. Yeah, so maybe I have some go-to stuff, but it's always kind of, they are zeroed, everything, and then I tweak until I think it sounds good, instead of using templates. I know that several guys do that stuff. It's fast, it's easy, it sounds good, but in the end, I remember this guy, Thomas Skogsberg, who did the Entombed stuff back in the 90s. He also had this setup. Everything was ready. You just go there, play, done. Thank you. Album done. Everything sounded the same. And I'm not a big fan of that. It's like when I do the HammerFall album. It's like, the previous album sounded really good. You're going to use that album as a template. And I'm like looking at Oscar and asking, you're going to write the same song 2 times? No. He said, no. You're getting better as a band. I need to get better as a, mixing guy. So I have to do it better every time.
Yeah. Well, HammerFall is the first metal band that my son saw. First ever heavy metal show the first ever heavy metal band he saw play live was HammerFall. So there's a little bit of trivia for you. But, it's interesting you say that, because one of the things I liked about the production on this new album, I loved the guitar tone. I don't know what it was, but just the guitar sound in general on this record was just I think it was the best guitar tone I think I've ever heard you catch on an album. That's just my opinion. But one of the things that really stood out for me, I remember when the first song came out, it was just something about the guitar tone on the production. I don't know what it was. It just hit me, and I'm like, wow, that sounds awesome. And so that stuck out to me, on this album.
Okay, thank you very much. It's just funny. I have a relative. He played guitar in Pretty Maids.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and he contacted me and said, like, the bass drum on this album is the best I ever heard.
Yeah.
Oh, you didn't like the guitar sound? I think the previous album, the guitar tone was better.
Yeah. Well, I like the guitar tone on this album probably better than any record you've done for Dream Evil, honestly. But I remember that stood out for me when that first single came out, and I'm listening to this. I'm like, man, the guitar tone is pretty good. It's pretty awesome, actually. And, then obviously you get into the song, but that was like one of the first things that hit me when I first listened to this album. It's definitely the guitar tone. And the fact the drums didn't sound like everybody else's. So there's that aspect as well. So I got one more question for you though, before we get off here. Any last words to fans that are going to be checking out this interview?
Hello. No, I'm really terrible to this kind of questions. I don't know what to say.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoy the album.
Yeah, great. And again, the album's good. Definitely one of the better ones you've done. Really enjoy it. And hey, you know what? I thank you for coming on the show and spending some time here, because you're definitely have been one of my favorite musicians and record producers that I've followed for a very long time. So it was great to have you on the show.
Thank you. It was a pleasure for me too.